Thought I would say this, but I believe Rand Paul might be the most sane person in Congress right now.
Pay no attention to what they say. Watch carefully what they do. Rand Paul of Kentucky, who's of course a sitting United States senator, seems to be one of the very few in Washington who's watching what they do, not what they say. And so he is opposing this effort to ban a social media app, not because he is a tool of China, though of course they're doubtless calling him that now, but because he is a dot connector from way back. And we are honored to have him join us now. Senator, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
I'll go ahead and presume to speak for you, too. I don't think most people are really that in favor of TikTok or the Chinese government. I assume you're not. I'm definitely not. But Republican leaders seem to believe two things that contradict one another. One, they believe that, on some evidence, that Joe Biden is like kind of controlled by China and that Joe Biden is pushing transgenderism. And yet, and that is true, but they're aligning with Joe Biden, who is suddenly claiming that TikTok is bad because it's too Chinese and it's pouring filth into the minds of our children. Now, he can't be sincere about that, obviously, so why would they be joining him in this? Do you have any idea?
You know, my concern has always been with the centralization of power, with giving up power. I don't care whether it's a Republican or a Democrat president.
Amen.
I don't want any president to have the power to ban apps that are sold on an app store. And that's essentially what this is going to happen. 180 million Americans put dance videos up and whatever else is on TikTok, and they choose the terms of those services the same way people on Facebook do. And does Facebook scrape your data? Sure. Does Google scrape your data? Do all of these giant tech companies scrape your data? They all take your data. But the thing is there are now accusations. They say, oh, TikTok's owned by the Chinese government. The Chinese communists own it. Well, that's not even true. You can't say stuff just over and over again that's not true. TikTok is owned by about 60% of it's owned by international investors from all over the world. 20% is owned by the two Chinese software engineers that created the app. And 20% is owned by the employees of TikTok, which 7,000 of them are Americans. So there's a significant nexus of Americans in the ownership, and then there's a significant nexus of Americans using this. And they say, oh, well, the Chinese government owns it. It's just frankly not true. Now, the company that owns TikTok also owns something like TikTok that is censored, and the Chinese let that be broadcast throughout China. The Chinese government does have a member of the board. It's called Douyin. It's the Chinese TikTok. But they don't have a member of the board of ByteDance. They don't control ByteDance, and the data is now kept in Oracle Cloud, centered in Texas. And this has been done because the company wants to try to exist. It's a very popular app. It has a great deal of value, so they're doing anything they can to comply. And yet the hysterics in the House are just, shut them down, communism this, communism that. Look, I've written 2 books about Chinese communism and what it does both during the COVID leak and also what it did during Mao's reign. So I am no fan of Chinese communism, but at the same time, we can't sort of like, emulate the Chinese to try to protect our way of life, becoming like the Chinese and banning things. TikTok is banned in China. They don't have TikTok. They have a censored version in China that the Chinese government does control, but they don't control TikTok over here. If we ban TikTok, we're simply becoming and acting like the Chinese. So there is a hysteria afoot, but in America, there are things that protect. You can't just take people's stuff in America. If you have a company, I can't come take Tucker Carlson Network just from you because one of your investors is from China. I have to go to court. I have to prove that somehow you're a Chinese communist and that you're giving data to them. These are all allegations. They may or may not be true, but you can't take someone's company worth billions of dollars without proving it in a court of law. Likewise, you can't take the rights of freedom of speech of 170, 180 million people who want to express themselves. So I think the courts will rule against this. They did twice in the last 4 years in federal court, and they just recently overturned the Montana ban. So I think there's a very good chance this is unconstitutional, but that doesn't seem to be deterring any of my colleagues in the House.
But their argument doesn't even make sense. I mean, they're saying that TikTok is foreign controlled. I'm willing to believe that, and that they're spying on us. I definitely believe that. But Google and Facebook are spying on us on a much greater scale, and they're foreign controlled too. They're run by people who hate the United States, demonstrably, they say so.
Which, by the way, Daniel Crenshaw, one of the leading Republicans behind this, that it's in support of everything Biden is doing, who's been pushing for this, it was in huge support of the Patriot Act, of course, after what took place in 2011. So, an invasion on privacy is something they're all focusing on. They want more government control. That's exactly what Tucker is kind of referring to here with Google and Facebook and all the hacks and the millions and billions of accounts they've lost, all of the scraping tools that they've built and everything they've sold on the black market.
So Google and Facebook are not a threat, but TikTok is? So if you're making that case, I know you're lying immediately.
Right. And the thing is that the bill is written such that if 20% of ownership is foreign, that's about what TikTok is, or if you're controlled by a foreign entity. But that's someone's opinion. They're just saying it's controlled by a foreign entity. I think it's probably controlled by profit. Like most things in the marketplace, they want to make a profit. They've spent about $1 billion trying to comply through this organization called CFIUS, which has to do with companies that have some foreign ownership trying to comply and have an American board, have the data kept over here. They've done nothing but try to comply, and the hysteria goes on and on and on. But the First Amendment's more important than anything they're talking about, and so is the Fifth Amendment. But there are many people, including some of your former colleagues at Fox, who believe that there's an exception to the Constitution, that it doesn't apply when there's national security. The problem with that is there's always a national security for any excuse for anything you want to do. And so I don't think you throw out the Constitution when there's allegations of some kind of connection. You have.
It's crazy that Rand Paul is saying that too, because he's someone that believes that Iran having a nuclear weapon isn't a threat against national security. And so, a lot of controversial statements from Rand Paul over the years, and seeing him kind of stick up for and be like, hey, you can't step on TikTok just because they're a corporation in profit, because they're worth billions of dollars. It's very clear when you see people like Kevin O'Leary proclaiming on news channels let me get in on the buy, right? It's just the obvious that this should be called the Facebook Protection Act, because quite clearly they want to keep TikTok going as it's insanely profitable. It's already under Oracle servers. Everything the CEO has done for TikTok, they've tried to support and follow the guidelines, as Rand is mentioning here, through these new jurisdictions. It reminds me of a lot what's going on with the SEC and the crypto industry. To me, this just looks like predatory capitalism at its finest, and it's just American companies that have been being outperformed and outpaced by these international agencies or these international companies that are trying to come in, enforce economic hitman policies, and take control by force or take control by regulation.
To prove that before you take someone's stuff and before you take someone's First Amendment privileges.
Well, and of course it's not. So we know it's not what they say it's about. Obviously, and I know there's a furious lobbying campaign by various investors hoping to scoop up TikTok cheap and from competing companies that want to crush a competitor. I get all of that, and some people are really paid for in Washington. I don't want to blow your mind, but that's true. But there's also an ideological battle here, and a lot of the people voting to ban TikTok object to the messages on TikTok. That's true.
Yeah, it's content. Once you start objecting to content, what you're objecting to is speech. And I object to a lot of it. I don't use it. I've never been on TikTok. I read about what's on TikTok, but I don't use TikTok. But the thing is everybody wants the government to be the parent. They're like, oh, my teenagers, they've got phones and they're on all this stuff. I just can't deal with it. Will you help me by taking stuff off of there? But once you start doing that, there's a whole host of things that can be taken off of there. What about, people who say that you should have religious liberty or that we shouldn't teach transgenderism in the elementary schools? Those are, heretical views as well. Should those be taken down? So I think it's the opposite with TikTok. I think they're promoting a lot of left-wing things. But then there's also people on TikTok.
By the way, only since the Oracle takeover. So we'll see if this video even stays up or not. But seriously, guys, I mean, at this point, if it's parents that are complaining about TikTok, they just have no idea how to understand the platform. And two, they just need to do some better parenting, in my opinion. You can't keep kids off social media. And if you can't even keep them off that with parental controls, that's not on the government to come in and step in and handle all of the jurisdictions, because they're going to enforce whatever policies and procedures they want. And that's the second part of this, is give the government an inch, they are going to take a mile. And allowing the president to be able to just step in and say, I'm going to ban this company because of A, B, or C, because I think allegations that there is international investments is complete, utter bullshit, because that is literally just going to result in what we have seen, which is the kleptocracy that America is today, where you have corporations embedding themselves through lobbying with these politicians ever since we came off the 1971, of course, Bretton Woods system, or the gold standard under Richard Nixon. Corporate lobbying has taken over. It would only get worse with advertising and centralization of information if TikTok were to be banned.
Do you live here?
Hello.